Hey everybody, today I'm going to go over a new install layout. This was asked of me by one of our customers that we sold some parts to, and he was looking for kind of the best way to lay things out, kind of wondering how I go about doing things prior to doing an installation. So what I'm going to show you here is an Excel sheet that I use quite a bit. This is just an example. What this is this is the easiest way, in my opinion, to go about wiring your car with a new installation for Holley. If the car has already been up and running on Holley and you want to add a sensor here or there, I typically suggest to add everything you want to add all at one time, so you don't go hacking into your wiring harness over and over and over again. So what I do here is I name the sensor function. Okay, so we just ran a list. So I just did this as a quick example, right? So we named the sensor function, what the sensor is actually going to do. So this is nitrous pressure, converter charge, shock travel, some VPS stuff, drive shaft speed, more nitrous solenoid pressure. If you don't know what that is, that's monitoring pressure at the nitrous solenoids. Trans temp, yada yada. List goes on. So this is a pretty in-depth install, right? If you're wiring your car and you had to put all this stuff in, this is going to take some planning in order to do this correctly. The next thing you do is your sensor type, right? So these are 5-volt sensors. This here is a frequency type input, right? So this is a speed sensor, so frequency. I use an F instead of a S because an S looks too close to a 5, so frequency. Then we've got a 12-volt input. We've got some temp inputs right here. We've got a 12-volt input. We've got a 20-volt input, another 10, another 5, a couple more 12s. That's once you have your sensor type keyed in, this will be good reference for you. The next thing you do is the location in the car. So this is how I subdivide cars out when we wire them, right? So there's front, there's center, and there's rear. Center is going to be all of your interior stuff and your transmission. Front is going to be the engine. Rear is going to be your drive shaft speed, your shock travel, your rear shock travel, I should say, any of that kind of stuff. So before you go, and the reason I do this is because you lay all this stuff out and you say, okay, well, I know I bought this shock travel sensor and I bought this VPS and I got this track temp sensor. You may not have it all mounted, so this is a good time for you to stop and say, hey, wait a second, I have to mount this stuff. If you've watched any of my other videos, you'll know that I've preached mount everything before you start wiring. Wiring should be one of the last things you do. So this may be a good time for you to stop and say, okay, well, I don't have a location in here, so let me just start looking around the car and see where I'm going to put this. So the VPS is 99.9% of the time mounted in the car, obviously. So this is going to be a center location. Then, drive shaft speed, that's in the rear. So the way I break these things up is, so you kind of want to know how the wire is going to flow when it leaves the ECU. And by having a number of wires going to one location, like all these here for VPS, same thing with the profiler, you have an idea of how they're going to all flow from one end of the car to the other. The next thing you do is decide ECU pin. And I'm going to show you the pin map that I just quick slapped together for this example video. So before you have an ECU pin, you have to actually, what I suggest you do is you go in here and you create all these inputs into your software, and then you start assigning them to a pin map. This will be a good reference point for you to come back to when it comes time to wire the car, so you don't guess if you put the right wire in the right hole, right? So what I did was I came over here and I created some inputs, right? So some of these are not defined because I didn't feel like creating all these inputs, but I just used a pin map from another car that I had an additional amount of stuff in here, and I disabled stuff that wasn't in our example. So converter pressure. So you want to create that one. So what you would do is you would name it, call it 5-volt, and enable it, and it'll say not defined, right? So like if we wanted to add another one, let's call it, I don't know. We'll call it fuel pressure fuel PSI return, right? This is going to be like the return line pressure. It's 5 volt. You'll see it's a 5 volt sensor because it's a pressure transducer and it's not defined. So what you would do is you would go in here and you would create all of your inputs. So name them all. You don't have to worry about configuring them right now. I typically tell people to, when they're doing this, create all of your inputs first. And then, when you go in the house and it's nice and cool and you're sitting around doing nothing, you can start configuring all of your inputs, and then you save your global file and you can upload it to the car when you're ready to, start checking everything before you fire up the car. So you're going to work off of your pin map, right? And you create all of your inputs. And again, this goes for outputs as well, right? So like all these outputs that you have, being used, you're going to do all those as well. I'm just showing you inputs because it's the same for both inputs and outputs. And then what you're going to do is you're going to click pin map, and you'll see there's the one that we just made, right? So we can put that there. But all your unassigned inputs will be up here. So now it's time to lay out your connectors on your Dominator. So what I see a lot of cars, and like cars that come to us and that we wind up rewiring, or cars that have been wired by somebody else and then they want to fix it, or guys that wired up their own cars and stuff just doesn't work, so they bring it to us and we wind up fixing it. What I see a lot of is I see like EGT2s over here and like 5s over there, but then they have like right front shock over here and like nitrous pressure over here. That doesn't make sense, right? That just doesn't make sense. So if you're using analog EGTs, put all 8 of them on the same connector, right? Because they're all going in the same direction. Why wouldn't you want to put them all on the same connector? So we'll get rid of these. We'll put this back the way it was. And then we'll move our EGTs back over. And now what we've got is we know all these are going to the front, right? So because they're going to go on the firewall bulkhead for the EGTs. So this example was using analog EGTs. If you're using CAN bus EGTs, these would be CAN type inputs, and you don't have to assign these in the pin map. So then what we do is we say, okay, J3 is full except for right here, B18. Is there anything that goes in the same direction when it comes out of the ECU where we can use it, right? So in this example, rear shock doesn't, but front shock does. So we drop front shock in here. So you can move all this stuff around and play with it all you want until you get it right on paper and in your pin map before you start running any wire. So you don't have a wire coming out of the ECU going to the left, and then it goes up, and then it goes over here, and then it goes here, and then here, and here. That's stupid. Where all the wires should have just came out and went this way. So plan ahead, right? So J3, you filled that up with your EGTs and your right front shock. So you can, at this time, if you wanted to, you could start to transfer that over to your Excel spreadsheet. For now, what we're going to do is we're going to go through J4. So J4 is actually my favorite connector when I wire these cars. I know that sounds friggin' lame that I have a favorite connector, but I wire a lot of cars, so it's actually my favorite connector. The reason being is it's got a lot of inputs that are all different types, and it's got a lot of outputs that are all different types. And I use a lot of inputs and outputs when we wire cars. So with that being said, let's look this stuff over, right? So VPS, we got all these VPS inputs. They have to go all to the same place, so they should be coming off of the same connector. There's no reason to have it like that, where you got to come off of J2A and J4 to go to the VPS. Plan ahead, and you'll have a nicer end result. So then we got a VPS general purpose input, and let's assume that the profiler is mounted close to the VPS, because they typically are. So they're going to be going in the same direction. We've got a couple other oddball things in here, and that is we've got trans line pressure, we've got transmission temp, and we've got converter pressure right here. These are all interior items, right? So, or they're center items, not interior items. We've also got the bump button, and we've got the trans brake button. So the reason I do this is because this whole harness can be built on the bench and installed in the car, and the end result is a lot nicer as opposed to hacking it up when you're laying underneath of the dash and using Scotch locks and whatever else you guys find, wire nuts and whatnot to connect wire together. So the purpose of this video is kind of just to try to help you lay out how you're going to wire up your new project. And it may not even be that you're wiring up an entire system from start to finish. It may be that you've got a handful of sensors you want to add, but think about what you're doing, right? The other thing to keep in mind is if you go over here to hit view fixed, each connector has its sensor ground and a 5-volt on it, right? Some of J3 has 2 sensor grounds and 2 5-volts on it. J2A has 2 sensor grounds and 1 5-volt on it. And then, J2B has got a sensor ground and a low current 12-volt output on it. So keep that in mind, right? So if you're going to be stacking a whole bunch of inputs on one, plan ahead, do your splice in your harness for sensor ground and 5-volt, and build your harness a little bit cleaner, a little bit nicer, so that it can all flow from point A to point B. So we can go back over here to view inputs, and now would be the good time to start transferring this information over to your Excel spreadsheet. If you don't know how to do that, minimize this, sling that to the side, left click that. All right, we go to pin map. There's our pin map. We can kind of just drag this out of the way, right? Let's see. Slide over, and now we can look at what pin is what. So what I did is I already keyed all these in. This isn't for a car that I'm wiring. This was just strictly an example for this video. So why do we have some stuff on J1A? So J1A is your engine harness. We know that the oil temp it's on the engine because it's monitoring the temperature of the oil that's in the engine. Pan vac, that's going to be on the engine as well. The nitrous solenoids, in every case I've ever seen, the solenoids are on the engine. So why not put all of these inputs on the engine harness, right? So let's, we can key these in here, and we can drop them in on whatever pin we want. So we can come over here and say, okay, this is on J1A, but is it on J1A what pin, right? So passenger nitrous solenoid is here. Click here, it's on A4. So this is going to be J1A4, right? Now you've built yourself a spreadsheet. After you key all these in, you modify all these to match the pin number that you're at. You've built yourself a spreadsheet for reference that makes life a heck of a lot easier when it comes to wiring the car. The last little tip I got for you with working with a spreadsheet is you can highlight these in different colors. Colors make life a heck of a lot easier. So for me, this kind of gets all washed out, so if these are all these numbers that kind of get washed out, but it's a heck of a lot easier to know that, like, hey, I'm working on blue right now, right? So we're just working on blue. Or J3, we're just working on red right now, right? So we build that harness independently. We make our J4 harness, and then we can come back in here if we want, and we can change all these over to, after we've built J4, we can come in here and change all of these to the color of our choice of, let's just say, black. So now we just completely ignore everything that's there because we've already done the job, right? So J4 is already done. Let's go ahead and get rid of all the stuff that's J4 so we don't get confused by it anymore. And there we go. Now we're only left with J3, J2A, and then J1A for inputs. When you're all said and done, you can highlight the entire thing and backfill with white, and now you're back to square one, like a standard looking spreadsheet. So it helps a lot when it comes to doing color coding is a big thing for me, and it'll probably help you in the future as well. I've got multiple different colored pens. That's how I do it when I write them in by hand, but you're already on the computer, so you might as well make a spreadsheet about it. Hopefully this helps y'all out, and if you got any questions, I guess leave them down below, and maybe I'll answer them. I don't know. See ya.